Have you ever had that moment when you're in the middle of a seemingly normal conversation, maybe having coffee with a friend, discussing work or weekend plans, and suddenly a strange question pops into your mind? Is all this even real? I'm not talking about a dramatic existential crisis or a sci-fi episode. I mean that subtle, almost imperceptible moment when you look around and for a split second, everything feels artificial, like you're watching a very well-produced movie of your own life. Maybe it happens when you're endlessly scrolling through your social media feed and realize you've been consuming videos of people you don't know for hours, living lives that seem more exciting than yours, and you ask yourself, when was my real life replaced by this constant performance of an edited version of myself? Or maybe it happens at work, performing tasks created by others within systems you didn't design, following rules no one can fully explain, and you get the eerie feeling you're part of a game whose rules were changed without anyone telling you. This feeling isn't new in human history, but it has never been as widespread and persistent as it is today. What you're experiencing is the result of one of the deepest transformations our species has ever undergone, the shift from a tangible, relatively stable reality to one increasingly mediated, constructed, and manipulated by systems operating beyond our individual comprehension. For most of human history, questioning reality was a privilege reserved for philosophers, mystics, and those with enough time to ponder abstract questions. For the majority, reality was what you could touch, smell, taste, and see directly. You woke up with the sunrise, worked with your hands, spoke to people physically present, and your biggest concerns were tangible: finding food, staying warm, caring for your family. The stories that shaped your understanding of the world came from oral traditions, sacred texts, or local authorities you knew personally, but something fundamental has changed in recent decades. Today, most of our experience of reality is mediated by technologies that transform, filter, and reinterpret information before it even reaches us. You no longer wake up with the sun, but when an algorithm decides it's time, based on sleep patterns analyzed by sensors you barely notice, your views about the world are shaped not by direct observation or conversations with neighbors, but by news feeds programmed to maximize emotional engagement, not truth. Your relationships are mediated by platforms that profit from your attention and therefore have a vested interest in keeping you connected as long as possible, even if that means amplifying conflict or fostering dependency. The result is that you live in multiple layers of reality simultaneously, and it's not always easy to distinguish where one ends and another begins. There's the physical reality of your body, gravity, and basic biological needs. There's the social reality of your relationships, responsibilities, and roles in your community. There's the economic reality of systems of exchange, labor, and consumption. And there's the digital reality, which is both artificial and profoundly real in its consequences for your life. When you question reality today, you're not just questioning the fundamental nature of existence, like Descartes or Plato. You're questioning which of these layers are authentic, which are artificial constructions, and how they interact to create your subjective experience of what is real. Modern technology doesn't just mediate our experience of reality, It creates entirely new forms of reality that didn't exist before. When you interact with artificial intelligence, you're having a real conversation with an entity that lacks consciousness as we understand it, but can affect your thoughts and decisions in very concrete ways. When you participate in a virtual economy, buying digital items with real money to use in worlds that exist only as code, your actions carry real economic consequences, even if the context is entirely fictional. When you build an online identity that is part authentic, part performative, that identity becomes part of your social reality, even if it's in part a conscious construction. This multiplication of reality layers creates a phenomenon we might call ontological fatigue. Ontology is the branch of philosophy that studies the nature of existence and being. Ontological fatigue is the mental exhaustion we experience when we constantly have to navigate between different definitions of real without having clear criteria to distinguish between them. You feel it when you must quickly switch between a work video call where you perform a professional version of yourself, a text conversation with your family, where you are expected to be caring and attentive, and a social media scroll session where you must judge, admire, and compare yourself constantly. Each of these interactions demands you activate different aspects of your personality and apply different criteria for what's important, true, or valuable. The questioning of reality you're experiencing isn't just an intellectual curiosity, it's an adaptive response to an environment that has changed faster than our psychological capacity to process it. Your brain, which evolved to navigate relatively stable and predictable environments, must now deal with an amount of information, stimuli, and choices that would be incomprehensible to any previous generation. The questioning arises as a protective mechanism. When your reality processing system is overloaded, doubt becomes a way to pause, reassess, and find more solid anchor points. But here lies an interesting paradox. The more we question reality, the more real our experience of questioning becomes. Doubt, uncertainty, the sense of disconnection, they become defining features of contemporary experience. They're no longer exceptions or crises, they are the very fabric of how we live. This means that questioning reality today isn't necessarily a path to firmer answers, but a way of life we must learn to navigate with greater wisdom and less suffering. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, when in your life do you most intensely feel this sense of questioning reality? Those moments when you stop and ask if you're truly living your life or just following a script someone else wrote for you? I know that many times we keep these questions to ourselves, perhaps out of fear of seeming too philosophical in a world that values fast answers and superficial certainties. But here, in this space, your deep reflection is welcome. Share in the comments, I question reality when. Your honesty might light the path for someone going through the same experience, showing that we're not as alone as we think when facing these fundamental questions. The question isn't how to stop questioning reality, but how to question more productively and with less anxiety. That requires developing what we might call ontological literacy. the ability to consciously navigate different layers and types of reality, recognizing the characteristics and limits of each without losing our basic orientation. Just as we learn to read different types of texts, recognizing when something is fiction, journalism, propaganda, or scientific documentation, we must learn to read different types of reality experience. One of the most important skills in this literacy is distinguishing between realities that are constructed but useful and those that are constructed and manipulative. Many of the structures that organize our social lives are human constructs. Money, laws, traditions, institutions, but that doesn't make them any less real in their effects. Money is a collective fiction, but you can't pay your bills with a philosophical observation about it being a social construct. The issue isn't whether these constructs are truly real, but whether they serve valuable human purposes and are transparent about their constructed nature. The problem arises when such constructs present themselves as natural, inevitable, or objective, when in reality they are choices that can be changed. When a social media algorithm shapes your worldview in a particular way that isn't a neutral reflection of reality, but a specific construction serving specific interests, recognizing this doesn't mean rejecting technology, but using it more consciously and intentionally. Another crucial aspect of ontological literacy is learning to distinguish between direct experience and mediated experience, without necessarily romanticizing one over the other. Direct experience has the advantage of being less filtered by systems you don't control, but it's also limited by your senses and your unique point of view. Mediated experience can greatly expand your understanding of the world and connect you to people and ideas otherwise out of reach, but it is also vulnerable to distortion, manipulation, and system limitations. The goal isn't to choose one form of experience over the other, but to develop the ability to move consciously between them, recognizing when each is appropriate and what its specific limitations are. It's like switching between physical tools. You use a hammer for a nail and a screwdriver for a screw, not because one tool is objectively better, but because each is suited to specific tasks. Questioning reality becomes problematic when it's accompanied by chronic anxiety, decision paralysis, or a constant sense of disconnection and meaninglessness. But when practiced as a form of conscious attention and investigative curiosity, it can become a source of wisdom and resilience. A person who questions reality in a healthy way isn't constantly in existential crisis, but has developed the ability to observe how different experiences are constructed and how they themselves participate in that construction. One of the most surprising discoveries of this inquiry is that you have much more power over your experience of reality than you usually realize. While you can't control all the systems and structures that shape your life, you do have meaningful choices in how you interact with them, how much attention you give to each type of stimulus, and how you interpret and respond to the information you receive. The simple act of paying conscious attention to the processes through which your experience of reality is built already begins to shift that experience. This isn't a form of solipsism or denial of external reality. It's the recognition that reality, as we experience it, is always a collaboration between what exists independently of us and how our mind processes, interprets, and responds to that information. By changing how we attend and interpret, we don't alter the basic facts of the world, but we do change our experience of those facts in ways that can be deeply transformative. Contemplative traditions have always recognized this, but today we have increasingly solid scientific evidence that conscious attention can literally modify the structure and function of the brain. When you question reality in an investigative rather than anxious way, you're training your mind to be more flexible, less reactive, and more capable of distinguishing between different types of information and experience. This training becomes especially important as we move into a future where virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology will create even more extraordinary possibilities for mediated experience. In a few years, we may have virtual experiences indistinguishable from physical ones in terms of sensory intensity. We may interact with AIs that simulate personality and emotion so convincingly it will be hard to remember they're not conscious. We may modify our own biology and neurology in ways that fundamentally alter our capacity for perception and emotional processing. In such a context, the ability to question reality in a healthy, discerning way won't be just a philosophical curiosity, it will be a survival skill. People who can consciously navigate between different types and layers of experience will have a significant advantage over those who passively accept whatever experience is presented or who fall into existential paralysis amid the complexity of choice. But perhaps the most important discovery in all of this is that questioning reality, when done wisely, doesn't distance us from authentic human connection. It brings us closer. When you recognize how many of your experiences are constructed and mediated, you develop a deeper appreciation for moments of direct and genuine connection. When you understand how your attention is constantly contested and manipulated, you learn to direct it more intentionally toward the people and activities that truly matter to you. A person who questions reality in a mature way does not become cynical or disconnected, but develops what we might call compassionate realism. The ability to see clearly how things are constructed without losing the capacity to engage fully with them when it is appropriate and beneficial. It's like learning to enjoy a movie even knowing it's an artificial production, or forming deep friendships even while recognizing that many social conventions are cultural constructs. The future of humanity may depend to a large extent on our collective ability to develop this form of wisdom. As we create increasingly powerful technologies to shape experience and perception, we need populations that are able to use these technologies consciously instead of being used by them. This doesn't require everyone to become professional philosophers, but it does require us to develop a basic form of literacy about how our experience of reality is constructed and how we can participate in that construction more intentionally. Questioning reality in this context becomes an act of both individual and collective responsibility. It is a way to maintain our autonomy and capacity for choice in a world that is constantly trying to automate those choices for us. It is a way to preserve the possibility of authenticity in an environment saturated with simulations and performances. And it is a way to stay connected to deeper values and meanings in a culture that often encourages us to live on the surface of ourselves, when you question reality today, you are not just having an interesting personal experience, you're engaging with one of the most important questions our species faces: how to maintain our essential humanity while we create increasingly sophisticated ways of transcending the traditional limitations of the human condition. The answer is not to reject change, nor to embrace it uncritically, but to develop the wisdom necessary to consciously navigate the transformations we are creating. Questioning reality is ultimately a form of love. Love for truth, even when it is complex and uncomfortable. Love for human possibility, even when it is uncertain and vulnerable. And love for conscious life, even when it requires more effort and attention than the unconscious alternative. When you feel that strange question arise in your mind, that subtle sensation that something is not quite as it seems, you are experiencing one of the most precious and distinctive aspects of human consciousness, the ability to observe our own experience and question it in pursuit of greater clarity and wisdom. If these reflections touched on something you've been feeling but perhaps haven't found the words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but wiser ways of living amidst the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth, where we question not only the reality around us, but how we can create more conscious, compassionate realities aligned with our deepest values.
Most of the information in the world is fiction. If we want to get to the truth, we need to make a special effort. We need special institutions like the media, like universities, like research centers, that they make the special effort, or like courts. In a court of law, it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to get to the truth. I hear a lot of people who say that no, we just need to release all barriers to the flow of information and the truth will automatically rise to the surface. Exactly the opposite happens. If you just flood the world with information, the truth will sink to the bottom under all this ocean of fantasy and fiction and lies.
If humans are so wise, why are we doing so many self-destructive things? Why are we on the verge of committing ecological and technological suicide? Hi, my name is Yuval Harari. You may know some of my books, which include Sapiens and Homo Deus. I want to tell you a bit about my new book, Nexus, a brief history of information networks from the Stone Age to AI. In the 21st century, AI may form the nexus for such a powerful network of delusions that it could prevent future generations from even attempting to expose its lies and fictions. As an essential background for understanding the threat and the promises of AI, Nexus explores the long-term history of information networks. It examines the Roman Empire, the Catholic Church, the Soviet Union, and many other past networks in order to highlight what is really new about AI. I hope you enjoy deep diving into all this and more within the pages of Nexus.
The key issue is that democracy is based on trust, whereas dictatorship is based on terror. If you,
If you systematically destroy trust in institutions, destroy trust in the media, in academia, in the courts, and so forth, some people think that this is liberating the people so that from these institutions.
Right.
It's not. When you destroy all trust, the only thing that can still work is a dictatorship. Right. So this is what would-be dictators do. They systematically destroy trust. And the other thing to realize is that the vast majority of information is not truth. A key misconception, especially in places like Silicon Valley, is to equate information with truth. Most information is junk. Because, to write a truthful story, you need to invest a lot of time and effort and money in research and fact-checking, whereas fiction is very, very cheap.